destined to become Iraq's ruler one day, had a vicious streak.
If he got into a fight at school, he would make sure that the other boy would be pinned back while he beat him up, and the bodyguards made sure that nobody intervened.
Qusay was more subtle in his behavior. He gave an outward impression of being reserved and studious, but both boys inherited their father's killer instinct.
He was getting them ready to be rulers. And to be a ruler, in Saddam's way of looking at things, was to be capable of horrific acts of violence, because at heart, his power was based on fear.
And the boys weren't the only ones in the family who saw violence as an effective device to get their way. Saddam's daughters were also capable of making brutal threats.
Aras Karim, the Iraqi National Congress intelligence chief, told me how he had been at school with Saddam's children. And one day when they were elementary school, he heard Saddam's daughter Ragad talking to her mother, Sajida, the principal of the school, saying that she was going to rip out her teacher's vagina if she didn't do what she wanted. Well, that gives an indication of just how there was no kind of boundary in terms of behavior imposed in the household and indeed outside it by Saddam or his wife.
Saddam set a good example as a bully. In 1979, he forced his cousin, Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr, to resign as president of Iraq. Saddam had finally muscled his way into the top post. With the Husseins as its first family, Iraq would enter into one of the darkest periods in its history. When Saddam Hussein became president of Iraq in 1979, he reveled in all the trappings of his office. His family now had all the privileges of their new status in society. They lived in opulent homes and dressed expensively, while most of the Iraqi people lived in abject poverty. Sajida Hussein made many shopping excursions to Paris and Geneva for clothes and jewelry. Saddam believed this ostentatious lifestyle increased his stature.
He's not particularly interested in having the kind of stature that comes from actual accomplishment, from winning the hearts of people. To Saddam, his idea of something of lasting value was a marble palace where every brick is stamped with his initials. I mean, to him, that's what would ensure him a place in history.
And Saddam took nothing for granted when it came to protecting his turf. On July 22nd of the year he took office, he called a meeting to expose those in the Ba'ath Party he claimed were traitors.
Nobody knew whose name would appear next. So you can imagine 250 of the most senior people in Iraq sitting in this hall, dying inside, waiting to see whether their name is mentioned too, because they knew that once their name is mentioned, they are dead.
21 senior members of the party were identified.
Saddam, at this point, expresses his gratitude to the remaining 180 or so, and says, as a reward for your loyalty to me, you will have the honor of serving as the firing squads for your colleagues tomorrow morning at dawn. So this made them all complicit also in his own total control through terror.
The Ba'ath Party and Saddam's relationship to it began to transform into the kingdom of Saddam Hussein.
Saddam may have achieved absolute power in the political arena, but this ego-inflating victory began to complicate his personal life.
Saddam became a womanizer, and he started having mistresses, and he neglected his wife, Sajida, and of course this built up a lot of resentment towards him within the family.
Uday was particularly incensed by the betrayal of his mother, even though Saddam had actually had a mistress since 1967. Her name was Parasula Lamsos.
One evening I stayed later than usual. He put on some Frank Sinatra music, Strangers in the Night, and the atmosphere was electric. He was very hot-blooded, and he knew how to act with women.
By the mid-1980s, Saddam Hussein was firmly entrenched as Iraq's supreme leader and did much to modernize his oil-rich domain. He also began to promote his own cult of personality.
On every other block, one has a huge picture of Saddam on a building and murals. Saddam as sportsman, Saddam as statesman, Saddam as kindly father, Saddam as military hero. But this is necessary for his famished ego to be told how great he is, how important he is.
He believed he was destined to be one of the legendary heroes of the Arab world.
Saddam Hussein sees himself as one of the great leaders of history. He sees himself as a new Saladin, the Islamic general who drove the Crusaders out of Jerusalem. He sees himself as a new Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king who sacked Jerusalem and brought the Jews into captivity. These images are extremely important for Saddam Hussein.
And like the conquerors of the past, Saddam sought to expand his realm. By the late 1980s, he'd spent almost a decade fighting a costly and bloody war with Iran. He'd started this war in an attempt to take over that country and loot its wealth. It was in this conflict that he first unleashed chemical and biological weapons.
He has the very most dangerous personality type that we know about. It's conceptualized as malignant narcissism. He cannot empathize with the pain and suffering of others, including his own people.
In 1988, Saddam began targeting the Kurds, citizens of northern Iraq whose quest for independence was a nuisance to the government in Baghdad. Saddam turned to family for a solution to this problem. His cousin, General Ali Hassan al-Majid, or Chemical Ali as he came to be known, was put in charge of a plan to exterminate the Kurds. Poisonous gases were used to kill thousands. Many others were executed.
More than 180,000 men and women simply disappeared. Many were later found in mass graves, but there are still vast numbers unaccounted for.
Brutality, torture, and murder became commonplace under Saddam Hussein, and his sons were responsible for much of the horror.
Saddam Hussein's family could not be anything but highly dysfunctional. And obviously you had in Uday a flamboyant character, a grandiose character who in many ways was a caricature of his father. There were many people who felt he was just psychotic, you know, violent, sadistic. His other son, Qusay, was much more like Saddam, apparently, in that he lived his life, you know, with a certain amount of discipline, although he clearly shared all of the goals of his father and employed the same kinds of methods that his father employed throughout his life.
Qusay married a young woman named Sahar, the daughter of a general and clansman from Tikrit. They had 3 children before the marriage was eventually dissolved. By contrast, Uday married 3 times, once to the daughter of his second cousin, Chemical Ali. But all of his marriages would end in divorce, and he would have no children. Instead, he became notorious for rounding up young women, raping them, and then leaving them in disgrace. His pursuit could often include murder. This horrifying conduct was typical of Uday, who'd become infamous for sexual assaults during his days at the University of Baghdad.